The morning sun was just starting to peek over the mountains when Jake heard the strangest sound he'd ever heard in his 10 years as a soldier. It wasn't like any airplane or helicopter he knew. This sound was different, like metal screaming through the sky, mixed with a weird humming noise that made his teeth hurt. Jake was walking his usual patrol route through the thick forest. His job was simple: keep an eye on this remote area and report anything unusual. Most days, nothing happened. He'd see some deer, maybe a bear, and that was it. But today was going to be very different. The sound got louder and louder until suddenly, something bright shot across the sky above the trees. It was moving so fast that Jake barely got a good look at it. Whatever it was definitely not from around here. The thing was silver and seemed to glow with its own light. Smoke was pouring out from behind it, and pieces were falling off as it flew. Then came the crash. The ground shook under Jake's feet. Birds flew out of the trees in every direction, squawking and crying. In the distance, he could see smoke rising up through the forest. His heart was beating fast now. In all his years as a soldier, he'd never seen anything like this. Jake grabbed his radio and called his commander. "Sir, we have a situation. Some kind of aircraft just crashed about 2 miles north of my position. It's not one of ours." The voice on the radio crackled back. "What do you mean, not one of ours? Describe what you saw." Jake tried to find the right words. I'm not sure how to describe it. "Sir, it was silver, glowing, and moving way too fast for any plane I know. And the sound it made, I've never heard anything like it." There was a long pause. Then his commander spoke again, and his voice sounded serious. "Jake, I want you to go check it out. But be very careful. Don't touch anything, and report back immediately. This stays between us for now." Jake felt a mix of excitement and fear as he started walking toward the crash site. Every step took him deeper into unknown territory. What would he find there? Was the pilot okay? And why did his commander sound so worried? The walk through the forest felt like it took forever. Jake had to climb over fallen trees and push through thick bushes. The closer he got, the more he could smell something strange in the air. It wasn't like any fuel he'd ever smelled. It was sweet, almost like flowers, but with something else mixed in that he couldn't identify. When Jake finally reached the crash site, his mouth fell open. He had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The crashed object was definitely not an airplane. It was smooth and curved, like someone had carved it out of a giant crystal. The surface seemed to shift colors as he looked at it, sometimes silver, sometimes blue, sometimes showing colors he didn't even have names for. It was about the size of a small house, but it looked like it had been built by someone who had never seen a house before. Parts of the strange craft were scattered all around the forest floor. Some pieces were still glowing softly, others looked like they were made of metal. But when Jake got closer, he could see they were actually see-through, like glass, but stronger. Jake walked slowly around the crash site, trying to understand what he was looking at. There was a big crack along one side of the craft, and he could see inside. His heart started beating even faster when he realized there might be someone in there. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone in there? I'm here to help." At first, there was no answer. Then he heard something that made his blood freeze. It was a voice, but it didn't sound human. The sounds were musical, like someone singing. But the words, if they were words, were completely foreign. Jake took a deep breath and moved closer to the crack in the craft. He had to squeeze through some bent metal to get inside. And what he saw there changed his life forever. There were two beings inside the craft, and they definitely weren't human. The first one was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that looked like it was made of light itself. It was blue, but not like paint, more like looking at the sky through crystal. This being was wearing what looked like armor, but it seemed to be growing out of its body rather than put on. The tall being wasn't moving. Jake could see it was badly hurt. There was some kind of liquid around it that glowed softly, probably blood. But unlike any blood he'd ever seen, the second being was much smaller. It looked like a child, with the same blue, glowing skin, but softer features. The little one was curled up in a corner, making those musical sounds Jake had heard. When it saw Jake, it stopped making noise and stared at him with eyes that were bigger than any human eyes. Filled with what was clearly fear, Jake had been trained for many situations, but this wasn't in any manual. He was looking at beings from another world, and one of them was just a scared child. The little one made a soft sound and pointed at the tall being, even without understanding the language. Jake could tell what it meant. The child was trying to tell him that the adult was hurt, maybe dying. Jake's training kicked in. It didn't matter that these weren't humans. Someone was hurt, and a child was scared. He knew what he had to do. He slowly took out his water bottle and held it up so the child could see it. Then he took a small sip to show it was safe. The little being watched him carefully, then made a small nod, a gesture that was somehow universal. Jake carefully moved closer and offered the water. The child's small hands were shaking as it took the bottle. As their hands touched for just a moment, Jake felt something strange, like a warm feeling spreading through his mind. Somehow, he got the sense that this little being was grateful but still very scared. As the child drank some water, Jake looked more carefully at the tall being. It was definitely alive but in bad shape. Its breathing was shallow, and more of that glowing liquid was spreading on the floor. Jake realized he was witnessing the most important moment in human history. First contact with beings from another world, and somehow, he had become responsible for protecting a child whose parent was dying in front of them. The weight of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the future of Earth, about how humans would be remembered by these beings and maybe others like them. He looked at the scared child and made a promise to himself. Whatever happened next, he would keep this little one safe. It was the right thing to do, and maybe the most important thing he would ever do in his life. Jake stayed with the injured alien and her child through the night, not knowing what else to do. He'd radioed his commander again, but all he got back was static. Something was jamming his communications, and that made him nervous in his gut. He knew they weren't alone out here anymore. As the sun started to come up on the second day, the tall alien, who Jake figured must be the child's mother, began to wake up. Her big eyes opened slowly, and when she saw Jake, she didn't seem afraid. Instead, she looked grateful. She tried to sit up but immediately fell back down, clearly in pain. The alien mother looked at her child and then back at Jake. She began making those musical sounds, but this time they seemed urgent, almost panicked. The little one responded, and Jake watched as they had what was obviously a very important conversation in their strange, beautiful language. Then something amazing happened. The mother reached into her armor and pulled out a small crystal that glowed with soft blue light. She held it toward Jake and began speaking. But this time Jake could somehow understand some of the words. The crystal was doing something to help translate her speech. "Danger," she said. Her voice weak but clear. "They come. Bad ones. They want." She looked at her child. "Want her?" Jake felt his stomach drop. "Who's coming? Who wants her?" The alien mother struggled to explain. Through the crystal's translation, Jake learned that her people were called the Star Watchers, and they were peaceful explorers. But there were others, cruel beings called the Dark Hunters, who traveled the galaxy looking for valuable things to steal or beings to capture. "My daughter, she is special," the mother explained. "Royal blood. They use her to control my people. Must not let them take her," as if her words had summoned them. Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was the same type of sound he'd heard yesterday, but different. Where the Star Watcher ship had sounded hurt and desperate, these new sounds were sharp and angry, like metal teeth grinding together. Jake looked up through the crack in the ship and saw 3 dark shapes moving across the sky. They were smaller than the crashed ship, but looked much more dangerous. They had sharp edges and moved in a way that reminded Jake of hunting birds circling their prey. The alien mother grabbed Jake's arm with surprising strength. Her skin felt warm, almost electric. "Please," she whispered, "protect my little star. This will help you." She pressed the glowing crystal into his palm. The moment it touched his skin, Jake felt a strange warmth spread up his arm and into his mind. "How do I use it?" Jake asked. But the mother's eyes were already closing again. This time, Jake could tell she wasn't just sleeping. Her breathing became very shallow, and the glow in her skin began to fade. The little alien child seemed to understand what was happening. She made a soft, sad sound and touched her mother's face gently. Then she looked at Jake with those huge eyes, and somehow he knew she was trusting him to take care of her. Jake heard the dark ships landing somewhere nearby. Their engines made horrible screeching sounds as they touched down. He had maybe minutes before whoever was in those ships found the crash site. "We have to go," Jake whispered to the child. "Can you walk?" She nodded and stood up on shaky legs. Jake noticed she was about the same height as a human 6-year-old, but she moved with a strange grace that made her seem older and younger at the same time. Jake quickly gathered his supplies and helped the little alien out of the crashed ship. As they moved away from the wreckage, he heard voices in the distance. They weren't speaking any human language, but they didn't sound like the musical tones of the Star Watchers either. These voices were harsh and rough, like rocks grinding. Together, the crystal in Jake's pocket grew warm, and suddenly he could understand some of what the voices were saying. The royal child was here. Find her. The master wants her alive. Check everything. She cannot have gone far. Jake's military training kicked in. He knew how to move quietly through the forest, how to hide tracks, and how to stay ahead of pursuers. But he'd never done it while protecting someone who glowed softly in the dark. For the next several hours, Jake led the alien child deeper into the wilderness. She was braver than he'd expected. When branches caught her strange clothing, she didn't complain. When they had to crawl under fallen logs, she followed without question. And when Jake signaled for silence, she became as quiet as a shadow. But Jake could tell she was getting tired. Her glow was getting dimmer, and she was starting to stumble. He offered her some of his emergency food rations, but she just shook her head. Either she couldn't eat human food, or she was too scared to try. Around midday, they stopped to rest by a small stream. The little alien knelt down and put her hands in the water, and Jake watched in amazement as the water began to glow softly. Around her fingers, she drank some of the glowing water, and her own light seemed to get a little brighter. "Magic water?" Jake asked quietly. The child looked at him and made a sound that was almost like giggling. She pointed at herself, then at the water, and Jake understood. It wasn't magic. She was somehow changing the water to make it safe for her to drink. That's when Jake realized just how special this little being really was. Her mother had called her royal blood, but it was more than that. She had abilities that humans couldn't even imagine. They heard the sound of the dark ships flying overhead, searching. Jake pulled the child under a thick group of bushes and held very still. The ships passed over them twice, but the crystal in Jake's pocket seemed to help hide them somehow. As the sun began to set, Jake knew they needed to find better shelter. The Dark Hunters weren't giving up, and they had technology that was far beyond anything humans had. Jake was good at survival, but he was going to need more than just military training to keep this little star safe. The crystal in his pocket pulsed with warmth, and Jake got the strange feeling it was trying to tell him something. He pulled it out and looked at it carefully. It was pointing in a specific direction, like a compass, but instead of north, it seemed to be pointing towards something else entirely. "You want us to go that way?" Jake asked the child. She looked at the crystal and nodded eagerly. For the first time since they'd met, she seemed hopeful about something. Jake didn't know what they would find in the direction the crystal was pointing, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever it took, wherever they had to go, he was going to keep this brave little alien safe. She'd already lost her mother, and she was counting on him now. As they started walking toward whatever the crystal was leading them to, Jake made a promise to himself and to the memory of her mother. The Dark Hunters would not take this child, not while he was still breathing. Jake and the little alien had been walking for 3 days now, following the crystal's strange pull deeper into the mountains. The child was getting weaker, and Jake was starting to worry. She hadn't eaten anything since they left the crash site, and even though she could make water glow and drink it, that didn't seem like enough to keep her going. On the third night, as they sheltered under a rocky overhang, Jake watched the little one curl up into a ball. Her skin, which had been glowing softly when he first met her, was now barely giving off any light at all. She was clearly homesick and scared, and Jake wished he could do more to help her. "Hey there, little star," Jake said softly. That's what he'd started calling her, remembering how her mother had used those words. "Tomorrow we'll find whatever this crystal is leading us to, okay?" She looked up at him with those huge eyes and made a soft musical sound. Over the past few days, Jake had started to understand some of her sounds. This one meant she was trying to be brave but was really scared inside. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her pictures of his family back home. There was one of his little nephew playing in a park, laughing as he went down a slide. The alien child touched the screen gently and made a happy sound, even though they were from different worlds. She understood that children everywhere like to play and have fun. Then Jake showed her a picture of his old dog, a golden retriever named Buddy who had died last year. When he pointed to the dog and then to his heart, making a sad face, the little alien understood. She put her small hand on Jake's chest and made a comforting sound. It was amazing how much they could communicate without sharing a language. The next morning, the crystal was pulsing more brightly than ever as they climbed higher into the mountains. Jake noticed they were heading toward an old mining area. He'd heard about these mines from other soldiers. They'd been abandoned for decades after the copper ran out. But as they got closer to the mine entrance, something strange happened. The crystal in Jake's hand started to vibrate, and the little alien became more excited than he'd seen her since the crash. She started making happy musical sounds and walking faster, despite being tired. "You know this place?" Jake asked her. She nodded eagerly and pointed toward the dark entrance of the mine. Jake felt nervous about going into an old mine, but the crystal was practically pulling him forward now. As they stepped into the mine tunnel, Jake turned on his flashlight. The walls were rough rock, just like any old mine, but as they walked deeper, Jake started to notice something odd. There were markings on the walls that definitely weren't made by human miners. They looked like the same flowing, curved designs he'd seen on the crashed ship. The little alien saw the markings too and got even more excited. She ran ahead of Jake, her feet making no sound on the rocky floor. Her own dim glow was getting brighter as they went deeper, like she was a battery being recharged. Then they turned a corner, and Jake's jaw dropped. A mine tunnel opened up into a huge underground chamber, but this was no natural cave. The walls were covered in the same crystal-like material as the ship, glowing with soft blue and silver light. It was like walking into the inside of a giant gemstone. "What is this place?" Jake whispered. The little alien ran to the center of the chamber where there was something that looked like a tree, but made entirely of crystal. As soon as she touched it, the whole room lit up brighter. Jake had to squint until his eyes adjusted to the light. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and Jake heard a sound like wind chimes. Words appeared in the air in front of him, written in glowing letters that he could somehow read even though they weren't in any alphabet he knew. "Welcome, Guardian. This sanctuary was prepared for the royal family in times of great danger." Jake looked at the little alien, who was smiling for the first time since he met her. She touched the crystal tree again, and more words appeared. "The young princess is safe here. The sanctuary will provide for your needs," as if responding to those words. Part of the crystal wall opened up, revealing a space filled with soft, glowing furniture that seemed to be grown rather than built. There were places to sit and rest, and in one corner, something that looked like a bed made of light itself. But the most amazing thing was the food. The crystal tree began to produce fruits that looked like they were made of pure starlight. The little alien picked one and bit into it, and Jake watched as her glow immediately became brighter and healthier. The tree produced something different for Jake, fruits that looked more familiar, like apples and pears, but with a slight glow too. Then, he tried one cautiously and was surprised to find it was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted. More importantly, he somehow knew it was perfectly safe for humans to eat. "Your people have been here before," Jake said to the little alien. She nodded and began making her musical sounds. But now the crystal tree was translating her words into the glowing text Jake could read long ago. My grandmother's grandmother came to this world. They liked the humans and wanted to be friends. They built this place in case royal family ever needed to hide here. Jake sat down on one of the crystal chairs, which was surprisingly comfortable. So your people have known about Earth for a long time. Yes, we watch from far away. We see humans are good people, mostly kind hearts. That's why my mother trusted you to help me over the next few days, Jake and the little princess, because that's what she was. He'd learned, settled into the crystal sanctuary. The place seemed to read their minds and provide whatever they needed. When Jake wanted to wash up, a section of the wall became like a waterfall of warm, clean water. When the princess wanted to play, the floor created games with lights and sounds. Jake learned so much about her during those peaceful days. Her name sounded like singing wind, so he just kept calling her Little Star, which made her happy. She was 7 years old in her people's way of counting, which was about the same as a human 7-year-old. She missed her mother terribly, but she was also curious about everything on Earth. Jake showed her how to skip stones in the underground stream that ran through one part of the sanctuary. She showed him how to make the crystal walls display pictures of her home world, floating cities among the stars, beings of light dancing in space, and gardens full of plants that glowed like Christmas trees. It's beautiful, Jake told her, but you must miss it a lot, yes? She said through the crystal's translation. But I like Earth too, and I like you, Guardian Jake. You have a good heart, like my mother said humans do. Jake felt a warm feeling in his chest. In just a few days, this little alien had become like family to him. He would do anything to protect her, not just because her mother had asked him to, but because he genuinely cared about her. But even in their safe haven, Jake knew they couldn't hide forever. The Dark Hunters were still out there, still searching. And eventually, the princess's people would need to know she was safe. The crystal sanctuary was wonderful, but it was just a temporary solution. As they sat together that evening, watching the crystal walls display images of distant stars, Jake made a decision. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to contact the princess's people and get her safely home. She deserved to be with her own kind, in the beautiful world she'd shown him. But tonight, they were safe, and they were together. And that was enough. Jake woke up on their 8th day in the crystal sanctuary to a sound that made his heart stop. It was a low, angry humming that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. The little princess was already awake, sitting up on her bed of light with fear in her big eyes. They found us, she whispered through the crystal's translation. Jake jumped up and looked around the sanctuary. The walls, which had been glowing peacefully for days, were now flashing red warning lights. Words appeared in the air. Danger. Hostile forces detected. Sanctuary defenses activating. The princess ran to Jake and grabbed his hand. Her small fingers were shaking. The Dark Hunters have machines that can find anything. I was hoping this place could hide us forever, but they're too smart. Jake felt his soldier training kicking. He'd been relaxed for too long, enjoying their peaceful time together. Now he needed to think like a fighter again. How long do we have? The crystal tree in the center of the room pulsed, and new words appeared. Outer barriers holding. Estimated time before breach. 2 hours. 2 hours. Jake's mind raced. That wasn't very long. But maybe it was enough. Little Star, is there a way to call your people from here? To let them know you're safe and need help. She nodded quickly and ran to the crystal tree. When she put both hands on it, the whole room filled with a beautiful singing sound. Jake watched as lights began dancing around the tree, spiraling up toward the ceiling and then shooting out through the rock above them. Message sent, the crystal announced. Estimated arrival time of Star Watcher rescue fleet. 4 hours. Jake's heart sank. The Dark Hunters would break through in 2 hours, but help wouldn't arrive for 4. That meant he had to find a way to protect the princess for 2 extra hours against enemies with technology far beyond anything he understood. But as Jake looked at the little princess, he saw something that surprised him. She wasn't just scared anymore. There was determination in her eyes. and her skin was glowing brighter than he'd seen since the first day. "Guardian Jake," she said, "I have been thinking about something. My mother told me I was special, but I never understood what she meant. But being here, in this place built by my people, I think I'm starting to remember." "Remember what?" The princess walked over to one of the crystal walls and put her hand on it. Immediately, the wall began to change shape, flowing like water but staying solid. "My people. We don't just use crystals and light. We can control them, change them, make them do what we need." Jake watched in amazement as the wall formed itself into different shapes under her touch. "You can control this whole place?" "I think so. Maybe. I'm still learning." She looked at Jake with hope in her eyes. "But I can't do it alone. This sanctuary was built for humans and Star Watchers to work together. I need you to help me." Over the next hour, Jake learned things about the universe that no human had ever known before. The princess showed him how to touch the crystal surfaces and think about what he wanted them to do. It was like the crystals could read his mind and respond to his thoughts. At first, Jake could only make small changes, making a wall glow brighter, or creating a simple tool. But the princess encouraged him, and soon he was helping her reshape entire sections of the sanctuary. "You're a natural at this," she told him, her musical voice filled with excitement. "Most beings can't learn crystal singing so quickly." "Crystal singing? That's what we call it when someone can talk to the crystal and make it listen. My grandmother always said humans had the potential for it, but we'd never had a chance to test it before." As they worked together, Jake began to understand what made the princess so special. She wasn't just royal by birth. She had abilities that even most of her own people didn't have. She could make the crystals do things that seemed impossible, bending light and energy in ways that looked like magic. But their time was running out. The angry humming was getting louder, and the red warning lights were flashing faster. Through the crystal tree's announcements, they learned that the Dark Hunters had brought drilling machines and energy weapons to break through the sanctuary's outer defenses. 1 hour until breach. The crystal announced. Jake and the princess had spent their time well. They'd turned the sanctuary into a fortress, with crystal barriers and energy shields protecting the main chamber. They'd also created something else, a communication system that would let Jake coordinate with the Star Watcher rescue fleet when it arrived. But Jake knew that no matter how well they prepared, there was still just one human soldier and one child against a ship full of experienced fighters with advanced weapons. "Little Star," Jake said gently, "I need you to promise me something. When the fighting starts, I want you to hide in the deepest part of the sanctuary. Let me handle the Dark Hunters." She shook her head firmly. "No, Guardian Jake. We're partners now. We protect each other." Before Jake could argue, the sanctuary shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling, and several of the smaller crystals flickered. The Dark Hunters had broken through the first barrier. 30 minutes until they reached the main chamber, the crystal announced. Jake checked his weapon, a standard military rifle that seemed almost primitive compared to everything around him. But the princess had helped him modify it, adding crystal components that would make his bullets more effective against the Dark Hunters' armor. They didn't have to wait 30 minutes. The Dark Hunters had better equipment than the sanctuary's systems had calculated. After just 15 more minutes, Jake heard the sound of metal being cut and knew they were almost through the final barrier. "Remember what we practiced," Jake told the princess. "You control the crystals. I'll handle the shooting." She nodded bravely, though Jake could see she was scared. Together, Guardian Jake, the final barrier exploded inward, and dark figures poured into the sanctuary. The Dark Hunters were tall and thin, wearing black armor that seemed to absorb light. Their weapons glowed with red energy, and their faces were hidden behind masks that looked like skulls. The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. The princess made the crystal walls come alive, creating barriers and traps that confused the Dark Hunters. Jake used his modified rifle to pick off enemies while moving from cover to cover. But there were too many of them, and they kept coming. For every Dark Hunter that Jake managed to stop, 2 more appeared. His ammunition was running low, and the princess was getting tired from using her abilities so much. Just when Jake thought they might be overwhelmed, he heard the most beautiful sound in the universe, the musical humming of Star Watcher. Ships approaching fast. The cavalry's here, Jake shouted to the princess. She smiled even as she continued to reshape the crystal walls to block the Dark Hunter's advance. My people, she said with relief and joy. The sanctuary filled with new light as the Star Watcher. Rescue fleet arrived within minutes. The Dark Hunters found themselves facing not just Jake and the princess, but an entire squadron of advanced alien warriors who were very angry that someone had threatened their princess. The Dark Hunters, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned, tried to retreat. But Jake and the princess had done their job. They'd held the sanctuary long enough for help to arrive. As the last of the Dark Hunters were captured or driven away, Jake sat down heavily against a crystal wall. He was exhausted, bruised, and his ears were ringing from all the energy weapons firing. But they'd done it. The little princess was safe. After the battle ended, Jake found himself surrounded by the most beautiful beings he'd ever seen. The Star Watcher rescue team moved through the crystal sanctuary like dancers made of light, checking on the princess and making sure the Dark Hunters were completely gone. The little princess ran to the leader of the rescue team, a tall figure whose skin glowed like moonlight on water. Jake could see the family resemblance immediately. This had to be someone very important to her, maybe an aunt or older sister. Through the crystal's translation, Jake heard their conversation. The princess was excitedly telling her rescuer about everything that had happened, about how Jake had protected her and taught her to use her crystal singing abilities. She kept pointing at Jake and making happy sounds. The rescue leader looked at Jake with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the stars. When she spoke, her voice was like gentle music. You are the human who saved our princess. I just did what anyone would do, Jake said, feeling suddenly shy around these magnificent beings. No, the leader said firmly. Not everyone would risk their life for a child from another world. Not everyone would stay brave when facing the unknown. You have shown us something wonderful about your species. Over the next few hours, Jake learned that he was about to experience something no human had ever experienced before. The Star Watchers had decided to take him to their home world, not as a prisoner or a curiosity, but as an honored guest. The journey through space was like a dream. Jake found himself aboard a ship that seemed to be made entirely of light and crystal, floating through the cosmos faster than he'd ever imagined possible. Through the transparent walls, he could see stars and planets rushing by like bright dots. In the darkness, the little princess stayed close to Jake during the journey, showing him how everything worked and telling him about her home. She was excited to show him her world, but Jake could tell she was also a little sad that their adventure together was ending. Will I ever see you again after this? Jake asked her. She smiled and took his hand. Guardian Jake, after what we've been through together, you'll always be part of my family, always. When they finally reached the Star Watcher home world, Jake's breath was taken away. It was exactly like what the princess had shown him in the Crystal Sanctuary. But seeing it in person was completely different. Cities floated among the clouds like bubbles of light, connected by bridges made of rainbow energy. Gardens grew in the air without any soil, filled with plants that sparkled like jewels. Jake was brought before the High Council, a group of the most important Star Watchers in their civilization. The council chamber was huge, with walls that showed images of the entire galaxy. Thousands of Star Watchers had gathered to see the human who had saved their princess. The princess's grandmother, who was even more magnificent than the others, stepped forward. Her skin shone like captured starlight, and when she spoke, everyone listened. Jake of Earth, she said, you have done something that will be remembered for all time. You protected our most precious treasure when she needed help most, and you asked for nothing in return. This is the mark of a truly good heart. Jake felt embarrassed by all the attention. I just did what felt right. She needed help, and I was there. That is exactly why you deserve to be honored, the grandmother continued. We have decided to offer you gifts that no human has ever received before. But first, there is a ceremony we must perform. What followed was the most beautiful ceremony Jake had ever witnessed. Thousands of Star Watchers began to sing in harmony, their voices creating music that seemed to make the very air glow. Lights danced around Jake, and he felt a warm, tingling sensation spread through his body. "We name you guardian of the royal line," the grandmother announced. "From this day forward, you are family to us, with all the rights and protections that come with that honor." Then came the gifts, and they were more amazing than Jake could have imagined. The first gift was knowledge. The Star Watchers touched Jake's forehead with a crystal device, and suddenly he could understand any language in the galaxy. Not just the words, but the feelings and ideas behind them. He could speak with any intelligent being he might ever meet. The second gift was longevity. Using their advanced science, they altered Jake's biology so that he will live much longer than a normal human. Not forever, but long enough to see many generations of his family grow up and to witness amazing changes in the universe. But the third gift was the most incredible of all. The Star Watchers offered Jake a choice that would change not just his life, but the life of everyone on Earth. "You can return to your world," the grandmother explained, "but not empty-handed. We will give you knowledge and technology that can solve your people's greatest problems. Clean energy that will never run out, medicine that can cure diseases that currently seem impossible to treat, ways to grow food that will end hunger on your planet." Jake's mind reeled. "You would give all that to humanity just because I helped one little girl?" "Not just because you helped her," the princess's grandmother said with a smile. "Because of how you helped her. You could have turned her over to your authorities, or tried to use her for your own gain. Instead, you risked everything to keep her safe, expecting nothing in return. That tells us that humans are ready to join the galactic community as friends and partners." But there was more. The Star Watchers also offered Jake a personal choice. He could stay with them and become an ambassador, helping to build bridges between humans and the many other intelligent species in the galaxy. Or he could return to Earth and help his own people prepare for the amazing future that was coming. Jake thought about it for a long time. The Star Watcher world was beautiful, and he'd grown to love these gentle, wise beings. But Earth was his home, and his people needed him more. "I want to go back to Earth," Jake finally said. "But I hope this isn't goodbye forever." The little princess, who had been quiet during the ceremony, finally spoke up. "It's not goodbye, Guardian Jake. Now that our peoples are going to be friends, I'll visit Earth often. I want to see more of your world, and I want to learn more about humans. From the best human I know." The journey back to Earth was bittersweet. Jake was excited about all the good he could do with the knowledge and technology the Star Watchers had given him, but he was also sad to leave his new family behind. When Jake finally returned to Earth, he brought with him gifts that transformed human civilization. The clean energy technology ended the world's environmental problems. The medical advances saved millions of lives. The agricultural innovations made sure no one ever had to go hungry again. But more than that, he brought hope. For the first time in human history, people knew they weren't alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors were friendly and wise. Jake became Earth's first ambassador to the Star Watchers, helping to build a relationship that would benefit both species for generations to come. And true to her word, the little princess visited often, watching as the friendship between their peoples grew stronger. Years later, when people asked Jake how it felt to be the human who changed everything, he always gave the same answer. "I just did what anyone with a good heart would do. I helped a scared little girl who needed a friend. Everything else was just the universe's way of saying thank you."